The body is dead and cold. We have an 8-9 Dolphins season, and today was the autopsy from Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier. Even though Mike McDaniel said he would have a full breakdown of what went wrong in 2024, that wasn't where our focus was. In fact, Barry Jackson is joining me now, and Barry can provide you a wonderful recap, and he has provided you a wonderful recap on the Miami Dolphins website about everything that Miami Dolphins general manager Chris Grier and I shouldn't say offensive-minded coach, but the head of the offense, Mike McDaniel, had to say about the press conference. But we will begin this press conference with their kumbaya, we made up, maybe, conversation that was had with Chris Grier between Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier and Tyreek Hill, who both met separately with Tyreek Hill, who, as we all know, basically said, I want out. Well, it seems like Tyreek is backtracking it, just like when he filed for divorce last year from his wife. Now, hey, I didn't mean that. Maybe I still want to be here. Or are the Dolphins posturing, Barry?
Well, all the quotes you can read on MiamiHerald.com, the full recap today. But the Tyreek takeaway, Omar, was it appears as though there's been a thawing in the relationship. It appears as though Tyreek was speaking out of emotion. And you know what else is encouraging? Besides the fact that Grier said he hasn't requested a trade, the other thing that I think if you're reading tea leaves, you can read something into is the fact that Tyreek Hill has restored his Miami Dolphins photo, him wearing a Dolphins uniform on his X page, on his Twitter page. So I think those are two good tea leaves to suggest that he is not pushing to get out of here. So the question then for the Dolphins is, even though he's not pushing to get out of here, does it still serve their interest to move on? To me, it would only serve their interest to move on if they get quality return and if they do it after June 1st, because the cap hit for Tyreek goes from $27.7, which is if he's on the team, $27.7 million, to $13 million range if you trade him after June 1st. So the Dolphins in that scenario would have $13 million on their cap, but they wouldn't get draft picks this year because it would have to happen after June 1st. If they trade him before June 1st, then his dead money cap hit is bigger than his cap hit if he's on the team. It'd be $28 million compared to $27.7 million. So in no way do you trade him before June 1st. That would be idiotic. The question is, do you trade him after June 1st if you get a second and a fourth in 2026? I would not, because you're better with him than without him. But do you think it's time to move on, Omar Kelly?
As I'm not even going to steal this from Chris Perkins, my cohort with the South Florida Sun Sentinel, but the minute they trade Tyreek Hill, they might as well all update their LinkedIn profiles. And I understand, and we've been discussing this for the entire season, Barry. We all know Tyreek has maturity issues. We all know Tyreek is a habitual liar. We all know he's a social media troll. We all know he's an attention hog or whore, depending on how you want to put it. I knew that was emotion talking. They should not have forced him to talk, which they did. And when you did force him to talk, the guy had been frustrated all year. He had held it in, played nice, and it came out. Now, as I wrote in my column, sometimes these things are like toothpaste coming out the tube. Now, there's two things you could do with it, Barry. You could throw it away, or you can put it somewhere and eventually use it and save yourself some money. This is the situation. Do you want to throw away the toothpaste, or do you just want to have dirty teeth all year?
No, I don't think it's past the point of no return. He didn't besmirch anyone. Now, he did commit a cardinal sin in not going back in the game. If only he had said, my wrist is hurting, the game is irrelevant, Denver's winning 38-0, it's stupid to put me back in. If he had only said that, instead of leaving the impression that he was quitting on his team, that was a problem. But even with that, even though it's a cardinal sin, even though no player should ever do it, I think you can put the toothpaste back in the tube. I think the relationship is salvageable because Mike McDaniel is the easiest person in the world to get along with, and Tyreek, for all of his maturity issues, is able at times to see things maturely and calm down. What was interesting to me is that we gave Tyreek ample opportunities not to rip the team. We weren't looking for that, but to tell us how he really feels about the lack of vertical throws this season. We all asked him virtually every week, has it reached the point of frustration? Do you want to talk to Mike about it? And he consistently said, no, everything is good. They'll come in time. So it went
I'm
from
working with my therapist.
Yeah, exactly. I talked to my father. I talked to my therapy. Talked to everyone and said he was totally fine with it. So it went from that to get me the hell out of here, right? That was quite a transition in just 1 week. Now, all that being said, you knew there was an issue because Drew Rosenhaus had mentioned on his segment on the Fox affiliate here that it was, just hard to fathom how deep balls have gone out of the offense. So you know that, obviously there's conversations between an agent and his player and his client. So you knew just human nature, it had to be bothering Tyreek that he hadn't been throwing a deep ball since week 1, it seems, right? When he caught the long pass against Jacksonville. So I think all parties are at fault. Tyreek should not have pulled himself out of the game if it wasn't for injury. McDaniel should have found a way to incorporate more in the deep passing game, despite the fact there were 2 high safeties, despite the wrist injury, everything else. So I think all parties share blame. Here's the question that I have for you. McDaniel said him pulling himself out of the game was unacceptable. He said in the press conference that will not be tolerated here. But if you're trying to repair the relationship with a player and get him to stay here knowing that he's your best option to win, then how can there be a penalty? You're clearly not going to suspend him for next year. A fine wouldn't work. A fine might even risk him asking for a trade, which is not going to help them because they're not going to get equal value for him. So do you just let it slide and say, don't let it happen again?
I think all parties were wrong in this situation, and that includes Mike McDaniel. When you look at that Jets game, why in the hell was Jalen Waddle targeted 7 times in the first half? Coming off I think play calling was also a point of frustration. I mean, Tyreek is back there returning punts. Like, let's be real about this situation here. And I'm not making, I'm always called the player apologist. He was wrong for what he said and what he did at the end of the game. I understand it. It was frustration from 17 games finally overwhelming him. And he said what was on his heart, which was, I want to be out of here. I'm tired of this losing. I'm a poor loser. We've known this. But, and let's not act like Tyreek has not tried to be a more mature player and a team captain. He's worked on it. Is he good at it? No, but he's worked on it. Was it ideal to making him a captain? Probably not, but you did it anyway. The problem that I have in this situation is Mike McDaniel and that relationship. They were buddies. Now the question is, can that relationship be fixed? And here's Mike addressing it.
I think there's the competitive spirit of his, can represent post game, especially in a season or a game that nobody likes. It could allude to a relationship being one way. I think I was very direct with him. He was very honest, and it was great terms that we were discussing. Discussed multiple things, including without wavering, that it's not acceptable to lead the game and won't be tolerated in the future. And he embraced accountability, and it was, I wouldn't say there's anything necessarily to fix as much as we had to clear the air in a rough and tumultuous situation.
Rough and tumultuous was the way. I think Mike was hurt you could tell Mike was hurt after the Jets game because that wasn't something he expected from Tyreek, especially the relationship they've had. His best 2 seasons have come with Mike McDaniel. The offense has been focused around Tyreek for 3 years, not so much this year, but he was the most targeted wide receiver on the team. I think just everybody had to get over the fact that there was a level of disappointment. And hey, let's be real about it. You had the 18th best offense in the NFL. That's Joe Philbin and Adam Gase territory here. So obviously there are issues to be fixed. Now, Barry, what was your takeaway from the Dolphins discussing what those issues are that held the team back in 2024?
I was generally pleased with what I heard. I was glad that Grier took accountability, said that he has to do his job better. McDaniel has to. You and I were both pleased that he said the offensive line has to be improved. It will be addressed. Those were the magic words we were all waiting for. And he did offer something of an explanation, actually more in depth than I expected, about why the offensive line was not altered last offseason. He said, we expected Isaiah Wynn back a lot sooner than he was, which is interesting because Isaiah Wynn told me the Dolphins always knew that it was going to take this long. So I found that odd. Secondly, he said we ran the ball really well in 2023, so we didn't think we had to bring in new players on our offensive line, which is true in the sense that they did average 5 yards per carry. However, you and I both knew that they should have addressed guard and should not have projected Rob Jones and Liam Eichenberg, bless their heart, to be their two starting guards. And he did point out that they signed Aaron Brewer, who was a top quarter center in the league, according to Pro Football Focus this year, although his play declined during the second half of the year when the run game was struggling. So that was the biggest takeaway to me. I was generally pleased with what I heard, but one thing I want to mention to you on this topic of trench play, which I know interests you and me as well. The thing that I didn't hear that bothered me just a little bit was this. When asked about cold weather, Grier never said, you know what, we have to philosophically change how we construct this roster. Instead, he blamed the poor performance in cold weather and against, some good opponents in cold weather like Green Bay and Buffalo on self-inflicted mistakes. He essentially said players have to stop screwing up in game. He didn't say screwing up. It was essentially that. So I thought that was interesting. Also, when he was asked, why haven't you won anything at all of significance in 6 years into this rebuild, the first tangible thing he mentioned was, well, our quarterback missed 6.5 games this year. You can't overcome that. That's true. However, the only thing I would have liked to have heard in what otherwise I thought was a very good press conference was maybe philosophically we have to look at building our team a little bit differently. Instead of spending all of this money at receiver and on speed, maybe we have to reassess that to compete with the Baltimores and the Buffaloes and Kansas City. I never heard that, but otherwise, I thought everyone took accountability, and I liked that they were candid about problems that I touched on Monday in the MiamiHerald.com story about persistent tardiness. That was a problem with several players. McDaniel was very open about that. I'm glad it was addressed. I'm glad they said that it wasn't going to be tolerated. Were you generally pleased with what you heard today, or did you leave saying they don't get it? Because I left thinking that they do generally get it.
In certain areas, obviously, I don't think that they addressed the negligence in the trenches on the opposite side of the defensive line. I know you got lucky with Calais Campbell. Let's be real about it. You got lucky. Don't think that you did a good job signing Calais Campbell. And I don't feel like that was addressed. I don't feel like we have sort of an understanding about what we're going to do with the future at inside linebacker. That wasn't addressed, and that's probably a little bit on us. What I did like, however, is that Chris Grier provided some clarity on why Skylar Thompson was the backup quarterback and summarized basically why most of us think that it wasn't good enough. He said in his press conference that we're going to play this pit right here, that, hey, we went after some quarterbacks. We were just the second pick for a lot of them, and from contract and compensation picks scenarios, we just didn't want to pull the trigger. Well, when you don't pull the trigger, you end up with an 8-9 record. And here's Grier addressing the backup quarterback situation.
Almost beat Buffalo on the road. We lost 34-31. We beat the Jets to get into the playoffs. And then and just watching him work through the following year, which he never got a chance because Tua stayed healthy, played the entire season. So we were excited about him and his growth, and the players believed in him. He won the backup job through the spring. But that said, as we always do throughout that entire offseason, and Mike and Steve is aware of it through it, we were in on a number of top flight backup quarterbacks in the league. We were runner-ups for a couple of them that we wanted to get here. And for some financial restraints and compensatory pick stuff, we just couldn't go to those prices. But all those guys wanted to come here, and so it's a position that we did not take lightly. We were working through that the entire offseason, and the fact that some of those guys were willing to come here at what we could pay them it shows how they believe in Mike and the staff and the offensive scheme and the players that are here. They're all excited about our skill group. So that's a position we will always focus on, and it will be a position that we will focus on this offseason. And I will tell you, every stone will be unturned at that position, including the draft.
I think he meant every stone will be turned. But here, and he mentioned the draft, which I like. I don't necessarily believe it, but I think it's important that you have teams thinking that you're going to be shopping for quarterback, for backup quarterbacks. I don't necessarily believe that that's the right route and approach to take with this team, just from the standpoint, a young quarterback is not going to go in there and win you games if something happens to Tua Tagovailoa, and a young quarterback is not going to get those practice reps because Tua monopolizes a lot of practice reps. But that's another subject for another day. Barry, I want to know and hear, who do you think he was talking about? They went to him and tried to get him and fell short, or just couldn't offer as much money.
Well, I can give you just the one name that I reported 2 weeks ago. I know they called Carolina on Andy Dalton after Tua's concussion. They tried to get him. They could not agree to terms. He's a free agent this offseason, so he's a name we need to monitor. As far as who they pursued last March and April, it's unclear. But it's the usual list of suspects you can probably look at. Garoppolo, obviously Jameis Winston. Those are the types of names that are going to be out there. Flacco will be out there again. I think what's clear is that they're not committed to Tyler Huntley as their number two. The words Tyler Huntley were not mentioned by Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel when they had every opportunity today to talk about their plans at backup quarterback. Instead, they said this is a priority. They're going to address it, which to me says they're going to be outside the building, which every Dolphins fan will love to hear, because you can't go into next season counting on Tyler Huntley to be your number two after the debacle against the Jets on Sunday. Now, your guy, I was watching your guy, Omar, Joshua Dobbs. He got a start for San Francisco against Arizona because of Purdy's injury. Final number Sunday, 29 for 43 for 326, 2 TDs, 2 picks, and a 47-24 loss to the Cardinals. So I know Joshua Dobbs is your guy. He will be out there, so they will have options this offseason. But I was pleased that they said they will address it. And that leads us into this. I never thought I would see the day where they did not treat Tua with kid gloves. For 6 years, it's like treating him like a kid who's crying all the time. They're trying to baby him. They're trying to say everything's going to be okay. We're going to give you a toy to play with. We're not going to do anything to upset you. Instead, they told him, you putting yourself at risk is unacceptable. It cannot continue. I never thought I'd hear the day in a press conference where they gave a warning to Tua to shape up and keep yourself out of harm's way. That, to me, was the most stunning moment of the press conference. I think it was a good thing. No?
I don't know, Barry. I really don't know if that's like Tua said it himself. He can't jeopardize the team. And that's another thing. They also said that the team has a great deal of confidence and belief in him. Even Tyreek, before he, threw his tantrum, said that QB1, we can't play without QB1. We can't operate without QB1. And it's the truth. Now, Here's the thing. Is QB1 a difference maker, or is he just a very competent quarterback in the NFL in the Matt Ryan-esque realm? Now,
It couldn't be more clear. And to win with a quarterback who is good but not great, we both know you have to make correct decisions on everything else. This regime has been incapable of doing it. So you're right. They did praise Tua for his growth this year. And frankly, he played well in 9 out of 11 games, maybe 8, certainly 8 to 9 of the 11 games. He had a good season. He finished with the same passer rating as Josh Allen, for whatever that's worth, over 100, top 10 in the league. But the words that were interesting to me were Tua putting himself in harm's way, Grier said, is unacceptable to us. They have never treated Tua like that. They're going to be mad as hell if he puts himself in harm's way and does something dumb that results in a concussion or a hip injury or God knows what that puts him out for a few weeks last year. I had no problem with them doing it. I respect them for doing it, right? Because at some point someone has to say it. Tua has to learn his lesson, even if it means you take all scrambling out of the offense and he goes into a fetal position every time that he's on the verge of being hit. That's simply the way it is because he's a guy, and we say this respectfully, we love Tua, but he's a guy who's fragile, no?
He is fragile. However, I highly doubt he's going to change the style of play.
He has to. He can't keep missing games. You're not going to get a wild card spot, which to me, as I told you last August, that's the ceiling for this team. They're not beating Josh Allen as long as he's there. The Bills make too many good decisions around Josh Allen for Miami to ever overtake them.
Fair.
So basically, you're going to be competing with a Chargers team that is going to be better than ever because Harbaugh is a hell of a coach. You're going to be competing with a Broncos team that has found a quarterback in Bo Nix and has a hell of a coach in Peyton. You're going to be competing with a Bengals team with one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league in Joe Burrow for a wild card spot. So those are 3 teams you're going to have to consistently beat out one of them for a wild card spot, not even to mention Pittsburgh, which is always going to be competitive with Mike Tomlin. So to me, how can you beat out any of those 4 teams for any of the 3 wild card spots? That's what the next 3 or 4 years is going to be like, in my opinion, unless Josh Allen has an injury that puts him out for an entire season. I think you're basically competing for the next 3 or 4 years for a wild card spot to open in Kansas City or Baltimore or Buffalo every year. It's going to be an unsatisfying existence because even if you get there, you're going to be heavy underdogs in your first playoff game. But that's the ceiling for this team, in my view.
It could be. I keep going back to, and this is something that I'd love for you to address. I keep going back to why Ross would keep things status quo for one more season, because I do believe that everybody's on double secret probation. And when you look around the league and you see guys like Rand Carthon get fired after 2 seasons on a team that's intentionally tanking, what do how long do you think you can be as Dave Hyde says, GM for life?
Like a Supreme Court appointment here. I would point to 2 reasons. One is Ross values having a coach and a GM who get along and communicate well more than most NFL owners do. I think it's an important quality if you're running a business in the corporate world. Your top 2 executives have to get along. It's important in football, but I think Ross has made that maybe a little more important than it should be compared to the actual body of work of Chris Grier.
Mind you, remember when he started the job where there happened to be a GM and a head coach in Tony Sperano and who was the GM again? Ireland, who didn't talk to each other for an entire year. So that's how he entered the realm of the relationship. And, he's faced some challenges there. While I do not support the keeping things status quo mindset, mentality, approach, I understand it from this standpoint. If you don't think you're finished with this team as presently constructed, you keep the guys who built it, assembled it, give them the opportunity to restructure it, and give it one more shot. Now, if it doesn't work in that one more shot, whack them all, shank them all, and restart this whole thing. Steve Ross has never cared about spending money, and unfortunately, they're going to be allowed to irresponsibly spend money again. Just because they're in their last, Steve ain't getting any younger. He's going to allow them to make it rain on people just to improve the roster, as they always do. And hopefully it won't be too much damage done for whoever takes over the team next year if they don't get a playoff win. And I think a playoff win is absolutely necessary. But Barry, taking away from this press conference today, this autopsy, they went after quarterbacks. They didn't get any. Tua's got to stay healthy and keep himself available. Injuries impacted us, but injuries impact every team. We're going to pay more emphasis and attention to the offensive line and improve our trenches. They're waiting on that question, Barry. We'll see what happens with Javon Holland.
I read that, Omar, as good luck to you. Thank you for your service. There was nothing to suggest that they were ready to make a big offer for Javon Holland. And frankly, with all due respect to Javon Holland, who's a good young player, they don't have the cap capacity to do it. He hasn't earned the type of $15 to $20 million a year contract that the high impact safeties have, just because there weren't the volume of big
Somebody's
plays
gonna pay it,
other
Barry.
than the opener. No, is that unfair?
Somebody, not 15 to 20. I think somebody's going to pay somewhere in the 11 round.
Yeah, I
11
think so too. But Miami can't afford to do that when they have all of these other needs, especially
You
at
don't
guard.
know what they could do, Barry, because they could shake down players. They could restructure contracts. They can give to a $20 million signing bonus. They're going to do all kinds of foolishness and boopery to create cap space to go out there and spend and make it rain, Barry. And then we're going to all pretend like this is healthy and wise and it's going to make a better roster and they're going to be more competitive. They're probably going to brag about the guard that they sign. And, and the question is, will they become a tougher team? Will they become a team that can beat tough opponents? And will they become a team that can play in the cold?
Yeah, that has to change. That will be one of the major measuring sticks by which Grier and McDaniel are judged next year. And I have no problem if they spend big at guard and defensive tackle, and they're going to need 2 defensive tackles if Calais retires. So if they kick the can down the road again as far as the bill coming due, I'm okay with that if you're upgrading the trenches. Now, there were a couple other things today I thought were interesting I want to touch on before we go. Grier was asked, do you need to reevaluate whether you sign players with a history of injuries? And he's kind of stubborn about that. He didn't say yes. Instead, he said it's a fine line. There's a 100% injury rate in football. We always look at it, but there's a risk in signing players, but you don't want to miss the opportunity of adding a good player to your roster because you're scared of something that happened a couple of years ago. So I think our answer is there. No, they're not going to shy away from signing players with a history of injury. But when you do that, you can't then turn around and say, oh, all our guys were injured, right? You can't have it both ways. Either you stop doing it or you do it, but don't complain about it.
How else are you going to get cheap, good players, Barry?
Right, exactly. Right. Older guys who are breaking down. They got extraordinarily lucky with Calais, as you said. For a player of that quality and that character to take $2 million in May was as rare as a meteor strike in your backyard. But most of the time, these guys are like Jordan Poyer, who at the tail end of their career. And if you pay very little money, you're usually going to get what you pay for. Now, want to touch on a couple other things. One was the fact that when they were asked, do they need to be a more physical team, we got kind of a meandering answer from McDaniel.
Yeah.
He said, well, we have to in short yardage, but then he made this odd comment about, well, in zone and certain spots.
I understood where he was coming from.
I wasn't totally satisfied by that answer. Were you?
I understood where he was coming from. They were a little bit more physical in pass coverage and zones than they were. I mean, but that's not what we're talking about.
Right,
Mike?
we're talking about trench play. We're talking about imposing your will and running the ball when you need to, which they cannot do.
It was negligent, which is what I'm writing in the Miami Herald. We knew it was negligent. They finally acknowledged that it was a failure. He might, and I give Chris Grier props because he understood the nation is mocking him in that regard because of him mocking us. And he also explained thoroughly, my thought process was this.
Right. Okay, a win will be back. We ran the ball well. Obviously, they like Liam and Rob Jones. They like
Keon Smith.
It was odd, though. He mentioned Keon Smith out of nowhere, saying, well, we didn't know Keon Smith would be injured. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Is that relevant?
Teams tried to trade for Keon Smith, too. Don't forget about that, Barry.
Apparently so. He also mentioned Andrew Meyer, the guy who we said looks like a truck driver. He said they're invested in him as a long-term prospect. So I guess we're going to see guards added. It seems to me like they'll stick with Brewer at center. Left tackle, Grier did say he had a conversation with Teron. He's probably going to have another one. Even if Teron wants to keep playing, there's no way they can bring him back with the salary and this cap hit. But I don't know why Teron would take another pay cut. Why does he need the aggravation and the wear and tear and the pain and everything?
Hold on. Let me explain to you why.
Okay.
If he wants to continue to play and he doesn't want to give up on doesn't want to end on that note, and he was playing some good football till the knee surfaced. Here's Teron. When we talked to him after the game, Teron said to me, at some point I'll disclose to you guys what was going on with my knee. And he touched his right knee. And it seemed like to me, and I'm speculating here, he was playing with a torn PCL, MCL, no cartilage. There was something significant that he should not have been playing with that he was playing with. But Barry, let's say we drop our salary to $8 million for Teron Armstead. Figure we're going to get 12 to 14 games out of him for the season at a relatively high level. What team do you think is going to allow Teron Armstead to not practice all week and then play 12 to 15 games for $8 million?
Probably not for $8 million, but he was really, really good except for the last game. He gave up 1 sack all year until the last game when he gave up 2, and he was clearly limited. I think there'll be a market for him if he plays because he still is generally an elite left tackle, and those are really hard to find. I'd love for him to come back at a number that's workable because you're going to take a step down with Patrick Paul. That's nothing against Patrick Paul. It more speaks to how good Teron Armstead still is. So you have to assume that the left tackle play is not going to be as good with Patrick Paul. You do have to hope that long-term Paul turns into a pretty good left tackle. I think he has that in him. And I want to mention this on the offensive line also. I found it interesting last year when I asked Grier the same day whether you guys missed Connor Williams. I said, it sure as heck looked like you did. He totally downplayed it, which I think was wrong because I think Connor Williams was a much bigger factor in their effective running game last year than they apparently realized. However, today, totally different tone with Austin Jackson. He actually volunteered the fact, and I think we both agree with this. He said, quote, Austin Jackson was a huge loss. When he went down, it was a slow bleed out the rest of the year. How about that comment? And he's right. Obviously, the outside zone was not nearly as effective as Austin Jackson. To me, Austin Jackson has gained more value over the last 2 months of the season by not playing than by playing practically, right? Because everyone realizes what the offensive line, especially from a running standpoint with outside zone, is like without him.
Yeah, I mean, Barry, I was ready to write a Grier gets the last laugh column. And then whoopsie-doo, Austin Jackson goes down, and all of a sudden they can't run the ball for 70 yards for the next 2 months. 3.0 yards per carry average in a 6-game span. And it's true. And what people do not understand is the lack and inability to run the ball impacts the deep play, impacts pass protection, impacts Tua's timing, impacts the way defenses play them, impacts the way the defenses cover Tyreek. So to me, if you had to give me you had to ask me the number one reason why this team fell short of expectations and failed, it also impacts how much the defense is on the field. I'm going to tell you it's the disappearance of the run game. Yes. And that clearly has to be fixed. Some people might want to put it on the backs. I do not. Hell, Mike McDaniel basically said that Devon Achane got robbed of a Pro Bowl, which I disagree.
Right. He was indignant that Achane was not a Pro Bowler. I'm totally with you. It's not on the backs. It's mostly on the offensive line. But I want to say this also. It's not entirely on the offensive line. The blocking from tight ends was not nearly good enough this year. I know you're skeptical of Pro Football Focus. I always preface any comment about Pro Football Focus with you by saying that. However, of 85 tight ends that qualified for the rankings this year, guess who were 2 of the 6 worst rated run blocking tight ends? Jonnu Smith and Julian Hill, whose one job is to block. And
you have one job.
He's a heck of a good guy. He tries. He did have several really good blocks, but the overall body of work from him was not good enough. You need a better inline blocking tight end. That was a problem. Receiving blocking for runs, I thought, was a problem as well, except for Jalen Waddle, who blocked well according to metric sites. So all of that has to get better. I don't blame it on the backs. I found it interesting, Omar. We didn't see Raheem Mostert for single carry on Sunday. We saw only 1 snap at all. Jeff Wilson, Jalen Wright played ahead of him. I wonder if this is it for Mostert. If you look at guys who are likely to be cap casualties, I think Durham Smythe is at the top of the list. Now you wonder, will Raheem be on that list as well?
Yeah, I definitely think Raheem expects to be a free agent this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see. And one thing I do want to tease you with is I saw on social media after they played the 49ers game, and this is something that I had been pondering for a while. There was a conversation between Mike McDaniel and a certain individual for the 49ers named Kittle, who Mike went up to him and said, South Florida is a wonderful place to live. And I thought to myself, Well, that's an interesting conversation to say to a guy who's not a free agent.
Well, they have cap issues. They have a lot of people to pay. Obviously, they've made some decisions with that, but the Niners have more decisions to make.
Yeah.
If I told you right now you could subtract Tyreek Hill and add Kittle, your answer is what?
It depends on the cap ramifications. I think you can keep Tyreek Hill and still add Kittle. Now, the question is for what? I'm just putting that into the universe because I remember the social media post. It wasn't an AI created conversation. I had to look at it over and over again and look at Mike's lips. And the lips basically said, South Florida is a great place to live. And Ken looked at him like,
and combo in recent NFL history.
Yeah,
so if they were able to pull that off, it'd be something.
Yeah, a Kittle Smith combo that might be quite intriguing, and it might help you address quite a few issues for the Miami Dolphins offense. But listen, we've got all offseason to talk about these matters. I think we'll be back on Friday just to break down the week that was in Dolphins land. Barry Jackson, Omar Kelly for the Miami Herald. This has been Dolphins in Depth, and we will see you later this week.